The stars did not blink. Out here, far past the last human outpost, they simply burned in silence, cold and endless. Captain James Reyes stood on the bridge of the ISV Meridian, watching those stars through the front window, and he felt the same small chill he always felt this far from home. The Meridian was a survey ship, not a warship. Its job was to map empty space, study strange radiation clouds, and note anything unusual for the science ministry back on Earth. It was not built for war. It had no heavy guns, no thick armor, no fleet of smaller ships to protect it. It had scanners, a small crew of 42 men and women, and a captain who had spent 15 years learning how to keep his people alive in the coldest, loneliest places in the galaxy. That morning, something changed. "Captain, I'm getting a strange reading," said Lieutenant Sarah Okafor, the ship's sensor officer. Her voice was calm, but her hands moved quickly over her console. "It's not natural. It has structure, repeating patterns." Reyes turned from the window. "Show me." The main screen flickered, and a shape appeared, small and distant, but growing. It was not a rock. It was not a gas cloud. It was a ship, and it was massive. As the seconds passed, more of them appeared behind it, spreading out like a net being thrown across the dark. That's not possible," said Ensign Tomas Ruiz, the young pilot. His voice cracked slightly. "Sir, that fleet is huge." Reyes felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his face still. A captain who panicked made his crew panic. He had learned that lesson many years ago, on a much smaller ship, in a much smaller crisis. "Identify them," he said. "Any transponder signal? Any communication?" "Nothing on our channels," Okafor said. "But sir, I'm reading weapon signatures. Powerful ones. Far beyond anything we have." The Meridian's computer beeped a warning. Then another. Then a dozen more. One after another. Like a heartbeat speeding up before a fall. "They're locking onto us," said Ruiz. Reyes did not hesitate. "Full reverse. Get us turned around. Send a general distress signal on all frequencies. Encrypted and open both. I want Earth Command to know exactly what we saw, even if we don't make it back." "Aye, sir." The Meridian's old engines groaned as it spun in space, but it was too slow. The alien fleet was already closing the distance, and their ships moved with a smooth, practiced grace that made the Meridian feel like a toy boat in the ocean during a storm. A beam of blue-white light shot from the lead alien ship and struck the Meridian's engine section. The whole ship shook. Sparks flew from a console near the back of the bridge. Someone screamed. The lights flickered, then steadied, then flickered again. "Damage report," Reyes shouted, gripping the arm of his chair. "Engine 2 is gone, sir. We're losing power to the aft sections," a crewman called out. "Life support is holding, but barely." Reyes looked at the screen. The alien fleet was close now, close enough that he could see the details of the ships. They were sleek, dark, covered in strange markings that glowed faintly, like veins of fire beneath dark stone. They did not look like anything built by human hands, and Reyes understood, in that moment, that humanity had just met something far older and far stronger than itself. "They could destroy us in seconds," Okafor said quietly, "but they haven't. Why?" Reyes thought fast. A predator that could easily kill its prey, but chose not to. Not yet. Wanted something else. Information. Fear. Control. He had read enough history, human history, to know how conquerors behaved. They did not always kill first. Sometimes they captured first, and killed later, once they had what they needed. "They want prisoners," Reyes said. "They want to study us before they decide what to do with us." "What do we do, Captain?" Ruiz asked, his voice tight with fear. Reyes closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. He thought of his crew, 41 people who trusted him with their lives, and he thought of the message that had just been sent toward Earth, carrying warning of what was coming. If he fought now, with a crippled ship and no weapons worth using, they would all die, and Earth would still not truly understand what it was facing. If he surrendered, some of them might live. He might learn something. He might buy Earth time. "Cut engines," Reyes said. "Power down weapon systems, what's left of them. Open a channel, if they'll take one." "Sir, are you sure?" Okafor asked. "I'm sure of nothing," Reyes said honestly. But dead men can't learn anything, and Earth needs to know what we're up against. If they want me, I'll go, but I want my crew treated as prisoners of war, not as animals. Let's see if they even understand what that means." A tense minute passed. Then the largest alien ship extended something toward the Meridian, a long metal arm ending in a strange glowing ring. It touched the Meridian's hull, and Reyes felt a shudder run through the whole ship, like a hand closing around a small animal. "They've locked a tractor beam on us," Ruiz said. "We can't move even if we wanted to." "Nobody wanted to," Reyes said. "Hold steady. Nobody fires. Nobody panics. We are representatives of Earth right now, whether we like it or not." The bridge crew nodded, some of them pale, some of them shaking, but all of them holding their posts. Reyes felt a strange pride in that moment, even as fear crawled up his spine. His people were frightened, but they were not falling apart. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the hum of failing systems and the quiet beeping of alarms nobody could fix. Then, without warning, the lights on the bridge dimmed, and a section of the far wall began to glow with the same strange fire vein pattern Reyes had seen on the alien ships. The metal seemed to fold in on itself, and where a solid wall had been, there was now an opening, and beyond it, shapes moved. They stepped through the opening like they owned the ship already, tall, reptilian in shape, with dark green-gray skin, and eyes that glowed faintly amber in the low light. They wore armor that looked both ancient and advanced, plates of dark metal etched with the same fire patterns as their ships. There were 6 of them, and they moved with the calm confidence of soldiers who had never once lost a fight. The crew backed away instinctively. One young crewman reached for a sidearm, but Reyes raised his hand sharply. "Stand down," he said, his voice firm, despite the pounding of his heart. "Nobody moves. Nobody fights." The lead alien stepped forward. It was slightly taller than the others, with markings on its armor that seemed to indicate rank. It studied the humans with those glowing amber eyes, tilting its head slightly, the way a predator might study prey it did not yet understand. "Which of you commands this vessel?" The words came out strange, slightly delayed, clearly passing through some kind of translation device built into the alien's armor. The voice was deep and grinding, like stone scraping stone. Reyes stepped forward, standing tall despite every instinct telling him to run. "I do. Captain James Reyes, ISV Meridian, Earth Fleet Survey Division." The alien's eyes moved over him slowly, taking in his uniform, his posture, his face. "Earth," it repeated, as though tasting the word. "A young species, unlisted, unclaimed." It turned to the soldier beside it and said something in its own language, quick and harsh, full of sharp consonants. The other soldier nodded and moved toward the crew, beginning to separate them into groups. "What is the meaning of this?" Reyes demanded, keeping his voice steady even as 2 soldiers moved to flank him. "We are not a threat to you. We are explorers, not warriors." The lead alien turned back to him. "You are now property of the Kaldrath Empire, Captain Reyes. Your species has entered space claimed by the Empire. This is a serious offense. You will be taken before Overlord Dralik, who governs this sector. Your crew will be held for questioning and evaluation." "Evaluation for what?" Reyes asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. The alien did not answer directly. Instead it said, "Whether your species is worth keeping alive." The words hit the bridge like a physical blow. Reyes heard Okafor's sharp intake of breath, heard Ruiz mutter something under his breath. He kept his own face calm, though inside, a cold fear had settled deep in his chest. He had known this expedition might be dangerous. He had not imagined this. "I go where my crew goes," Reyes said firmly. "If you're taking them, you're taking me." The lead alien made a sound that might have been amusement, a low rumble deep in its throat. "You will be separated from your crew, Captain. You have been chosen for a different purpose. The Empire does not often speak with the leaders of species it conquers. Consider yourself fortunate." Before Reyes could argue further, the 2 flanking soldiers gripped his arms with startling strength. He was pulled backward through the strange opening in the wall, away from his bridge, away from his crew, into a corridor that glowed faintly with the same fire vein light. He caught one last glimpse of Okafor's frightened face, of Ruiz reaching toward him uselessly, before the opening sealed shut behind him, and the Meridian disappeared from view. The corridor beyond was unlike anything Reyes had ever seen. The walls pulsed gently with light, almost like a living thing breathing. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something metallic, something that reminded him of blood, though he could not say why. Soldiers marched him forward without a word, their grip firm but not cruel, simply efficient, the way one might handle valuable cargo rather than a prisoner. They passed through several sealed doors, each one opening only when the lead soldier pressed a hand against a glowing panel. Reyes tried to memorize the path, tried to note every detail he could, every turn, every symbol on the walls, every piece of technology he passed. If he was going to survive this, if his crew was going to survive this, he would need every scrap of information he could gather. Finally, they reached a large chamber, round in shape, with a high ceiling that seemed to stretch up into darkness. In the center of the room was a raised platform, and on it stood another alien, larger than the soldiers, wearing armor far more elaborate, covered in gold and dark red markings that seemed to shift and swirl like flowing lava. This, Reyes understood immediately, was someone important. "Overlord Dralik," the lead soldier said, bowing slightly. "The human captain, as ordered." Dralik turned slowly, and his eyes, a deeper amber than the soldiers', fixed on Reyes with an intensity that made the captain's skin crawl. He was easily 7 feet tall, his frame broad and powerful, even beneath the armor, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that filled the entire chamber. "So this is the leader of the little ship that dared to enter our territory." Dralik stepped down from the platform, circling Reyes slowly, like a predator sizing up prey it had not yet decided how to kill. Small, weak, fragile, I would guess, beneath that thin covering of cloth and metal. "And yet you gave the order to surrender rather than fight, even when your ship's weapons, pitiful as they were, could have fired at least once." Reyes said nothing, watching the alien warlord carefully. "Most young species fight," Dralik continued. "They fight because they are afraid, and because they believe fighting proves their courage, even when it accomplishes nothing but their own destruction. You did not fight. Why?" "Because dead men can't negotiate," Reyes said simply, "and I'd rather understand my enemy than die not knowing anything about them." Dralik's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, Reyes thought he had made a fatal mistake. Then, unexpectedly, the Overlord let out a deep, rumbling laugh that echoed through the chamber. "A practical mind. Rare, among the young species we encounter. Most beg. Some threaten, foolishly. You study." He stopped circling, and stood directly in front of Reyes, towering over him. "Tell me, Captain Reyes, do you know what happens to species who resist the Kaldrath Empire?" "I can guess," Reyes said. "They are erased," Dralik said simply. "Their worlds burned, their history forgotten, their names struck from every record. We have done this 312 times in the last 1,000 years. Your species is number 313, unless you give us a reason to choose differently." The words hung heavy in the air, and Reyes felt the true weight of the situation settle onto his shoulders. This was not a rescue mission he could plan his way out of. This was the survival of his entire species, and it now rested, at least in part, on what he said and did in the next few moments. "Then let me ask you something," Reyes said, keeping his voice steady though his heart pounded. "If you're so certain you'll erase us like all the others, why haven't you done it already? Why bring me here to talk instead of simply destroying my ship and moving on to the next star system?" Dralik studied him for a long moment, and something shifted behind those glowing amber eyes, something that might have been curiosity, or perhaps respect, though Reyes could not be sure an alien conqueror felt such things the way humans did. "Because," Dralik said slowly, "in 312 conquests, I have never once met a captain who asked to understand his enemy before begging for his life. You interest me, Captain Reyes, and I do not often find myself interested in the young species we conquer." He turned and began walking back toward his platform. "You will remain here, under guard, until I decide what to do with you and your crew. Do not attempt to escape. There is nowhere on this ship, or in this sector of space, that you could run to." As Dralik ascended his platform once more, Reyes felt the soldiers grip his arms again, ready to lead him away to whatever prison cell awaited him. But even as fear gripped his chest, another feeling began to grow alongside it, small but stubborn, refusing to be crushed. Somewhere out there, His crew was still alive. Somewhere out there, his distress signal was racing toward Earth. And somewhere on this massive alien warship, there had to be a weakness, a crack in the armor of an empire that had never lost. He just had to find it. As the soldiers led him from the chamber, Reyes glanced back once at Overlord Dralik, standing tall and confident on his platform, utterly certain of his empire's endless power. Reyes said nothing, but in his mind, a plan was already beginning to form, small and fragile, but growing with every step he took deeper into the belly of the alien warship. He would need to see more of this ship. He would need to understand it, its weapons, its crew, its weaknesses, everything about the vessel that made the Kaldrath Empire so feared across the stars. And as the soldiers marched him down another glowing corridor, deeper into the heart of the alien flagship, Reyes realized there was only one way to learn what he needed to know. He would have to ask to see their warship. The cell they placed Captain James Reyes in was not what he expected. He had imagined bars, chains, perhaps a dark and dirty room built to break the spirit of prisoners. Instead, he found himself in a small chamber with smooth gray walls that glowed faintly with the same fire-vein light he had seen throughout the ship. There was a simple bed built into the wall, a low table, and no visible door once the entrance sealed shut behind him. The room was clean, almost comfortable, and that unsettled Reyes more than chains would have. An empire that could conquer 300 worlds did not need to be cruel to control its prisoners. Its power alone was enough. He sat on the edge of the bed and let himself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. His hands were shaking slightly, and he pressed them flat against his knees to steady them. Somewhere on this ship, his crew was scattered, frightened, waiting for orders he could not give them. Somewhere far behind him, the Meridian drifted, crippled and empty, a ghost ship carrying the last trace of Earth this deep in unknown space. And somewhere ahead of him, Overlord Dralik was deciding whether humanity would live or become the 313th species erased from the galaxy's memory. Reyes closed his eyes and forced himself to think clearly. Panic would not help him now. Only information would help him. He needed to understand the Kaldrath Empire, its strengths, its weaknesses, its history, and its warship, if he was going to find any way to protect his crew and his species. He did not have to wait long. After what felt like an hour, though he had no way to measure time in the featureless cell, the wall opened again, and a single Kaldrath soldier stood in the entrance. This one was smaller than the others he had seen, its armor plainer, its markings simpler. "You will come with me," the soldier said, its translated voice flat and mechanical. "Overlord Dralik wishes to speak with you again." Reyes stood and followed without resistance. There was no point resisting, not yet, not until he understood enough to know what resistance might accomplish. The soldier led him through corridors that all looked similar to Reyes, glowing walls, sealed doors, the faint metallic smell in the air. He tried to count turns, tried to note any detail that might help him later, but the ship was vast, and every hallway looked much like the last. They arrived at a smaller chamber than before, more of a private room than a throne room. Overlord Dralik sat in a large chair, more like a throne than furniture, studying a floating screen of glowing symbols that Reyes could not read. When the soldier announced Reyes's arrival, Dralik waved a hand, and the screen vanished. "Captain Reyes," Dralik said, his amber eyes fixing on the human once more. "Sit." A second chair rose from the floor near Reyes, smaller than Dralik's, clearly built for the alien's own kind, rather than for a human. But Reyes sat anyway, adjusting himself as best he could. "I have been reviewing the data our scanners collected from your ship," Dralik said. "Your technology is primitive by our standards. Your engines are inefficient. Your weapons are barely capable of scratching our hull plating. Your ship's computer systems are laughably simple." He paused, studying Reyes carefully. "And yet, something interests me. Your species has only had space travel for what our records estimate to be less than 200 years. In that short time, you have already begun exploring far beyond your home system. Most young species take much longer to grow so bold, or so foolish. Curiosity moves fast when it's not held back by fear," Reyes said. "We wanted to know what was out here." "And now you know," Dralik said, a note of dark amusement in his voice. "Tell me about your Earth, Captain. Tell me about your people." Reyes considered his words carefully. He did not know what Dralik intended to do with any information he shared, but he also understood that refusing to speak at all would gain him nothing. Silence would not save his crew. Information, carefully shared, might buy time, and time was the only thing he could offer his species right now. Earth is a single world, Reyes said. About 8 billion people live there, across many nations, many cultures, many languages. We fight among ourselves sometimes, but less than we used to. We've only recently begun exploring beyond our own solar system. This ship, the Meridian, was one of our survey vessels, sent to map nearby star systems and look for resources, for other life, for anything worth knowing. 8 billion, Dralik repeated, something calculating in his tone. A large population for such a young species. Tell me, Captain, what does your Earth do with species it considers lesser? When your kind encounters weaker animals, weaker groups, what happens to them? The question felt like a trap, and Reyes chose his words with great care. It depends on the animal, and depends on the person asking. Some humans have hunted other species to extinction. Some have worked hard to protect and preserve them. We are not one single mind, Overlord Dralik. We disagree with each other constantly. It's one of our greatest weaknesses, and, I think, one of our greatest strengths. Dralik leaned forward slightly. Explain that. Because we disagree, we test each other's ideas, Reyes said. Because we argue, we find better answers than any one of us could find alone. Because we are stubborn and difficult and slow to agree on anything. When we finally do agree on something, it tends to be very hard to stop us. For a long moment, Dralik said nothing, simply studying Reyes with those glowing amber eyes. Then he sat back in his throne-like chair. The Kaldrath Empire has never operated this way. We conquered our own homeworld's other nations 3,000 years ago. Since then, we have known only one voice, one purpose, one command structure. Diversity of thought, to us, has always seemed like weakness. Confusion, wasted effort. And yet you're curious about it, Reyes observed, or you wouldn't be asking. Dralik's eyes narrowed slightly, though this time Reyes sensed it was not anger, but something closer to reluctant respect. You are perceptive for a creature so recently pulled from the mud of your homeworld. We've been called worse, Reyes said dryly. Dralik made that same low, rumbling laugh Reyes had heard before. You do not fear death the way most prisoners fear it. Why is that, Captain Reyes? Reyes thought of his crew, of his family back on Earth, of everyone counting on him to bring information home, even if he could not bring himself home. I fear it, he admitted. I'm not foolish enough to pretend otherwise. But I've learned that fear only helps you if you use it, not if you let it use you. Right now, being afraid doesn't help my crew. Understanding you might. And what would you like to understand? Dralik asked, an edge of challenge in his voice, as though daring the small human to ask for something beyond his station. Reyes decided, in that moment, to take the risk that had been forming in his mind since he first stepped aboard this ship. Your empire has conquered over 300 worlds. Your soldiers, your weapons, your technology. All of it is far beyond what my species has built. I would like to understand exactly what we are facing, Overlord Dralik. Not because I think knowing will save me, but because if my species is going to survive, someone needs to bring real information home, not fear and guesses. And what information do you seek? Dralik asked, his tone somewhere between amusement and genuine curiosity. Reyes took a breath, steadying himself before speaking the words he had been building toward. I would like to see your warship, this ship, the heart of your fleet. I want to understand what my species is truly up against. The room fell silent. Even the soldier standing guard near the entrance seemed to stiffen slightly, as though the request itself was unusual enough to draw attention. Dralik studied Reyes for a long moment, his expression unreadable behind the alien features Reyes still could not fully interpret. You wish to see the Ashven, Dralik said finally, naming the ship, Reyes realized for the first time. The pride of the Kaldrath fleet, the vessel that has led 300 conquests across 1,000 years of expansion. You believe I would simply show you our greatest weapon? I believe, Reyes said carefully, that an empire as powerful as yours has nothing to fear from showing a prisoner its strength. If anything, it would prove your point better than any words could. Show me what we're facing, Overlord Dralik. Let me see, with my own eyes, exactly how outmatched my species is. Perhaps that knowledge alone will be enough to convince Earth that resistance is pointless, and convince you that we're worth keeping alive as students, rather than enemies to erase. It was a gamble, and Reyes knew it. He was betting on the pride of a conqueror who had never lost, betting that showing off the Ashvin's power would seem, to Dralik, like a demonstration of dominance rather than a risk. He was betting that Dralik's confidence, built over 300 conquests, would make him careless with a single human prisoner who seemed too weak and too small to be any real threat. Dralik rose from his throne slowly, moving to stand before the wide window that looked out over the ship's other structures, over the small dots of Kaldrath soldiers moving through distant corridors, over the vast machinery of an empire built to conquer and consume everything it touched. For a long moment he said nothing, and Reyes waited, his heart pounding, uncertain whether he had just made a clever move or a fatal mistake. In 312 conquests, Dralik said slowly, I have shown our warship to exactly no prisoners. There has never been a reason. Most species we conquer already know they are defeated the moment they see our fleet arrive. They do not ask questions. They beg, or they die fighting uselessly, or they simply weep. He turned back to face Reyes. You are the first prisoner in 1,000 years of Kaldrath conquest who has asked to see the instrument of his own species' potential destruction, out of nothing more than a desire to understand it. Does that frighten you? Reyes asked, immediately wondering if he had pushed too far. But Dralik did not seem angry. If anything, something in his expression shifted toward genuine interest, the kind of interest a scholar might show toward a strange and unexpected specimen. No, Captain Reyes, it intrigues me. Perhaps your species is not simply another young, foolish race stumbling into the stars before it understands the dangers waiting there. Perhaps there is something in your kind, worth studying more closely, before I decide your fate. He walked slowly back toward his throne and sat, his eyes never leaving Reyes. Very well, Captain. I will grant your request. Tomorrow, you will be given a tour of the Ashven, guided by one of my officers. You will see our warship, our weapons, our crew, everything that makes the Kaldrath Empire the most powerful force this arm of the galaxy has ever known. Perhaps, when you have seen it all, you will understand the wisdom of surrender, and perhaps you will carry that understanding back to your Earth, if I decide to let you live long enough to do so. Reyes felt a small, cold thrill of victory beneath his fear. It was not freedom, it was not safety, not for himself or for his crew. But it was information, and information was the only weapon he had left. Thank you, Overlord Dralik. Do not thank me yet, Dralik said, something dark and knowing in his voice. Many prisoners who have seen the full power of the Kaldrath Empire have wished afterward that they had never asked to see it at all. We shall see, Captain Reyes, which kind of prisoner you turn out to be. The soldier stepped forward to lead Reyes back to his cell, and as he walked through the glowing corridors once more, Reyes allowed himself, for just a moment, to feel something other than fear. It was not hope, not exactly. It was closer to purpose, the same feeling he had felt during the darkest moments of his career, when everything seemed lost except the next step in front of him. Tomorrow, he would see the Ashven. Tomorrow, he would learn everything he could about the ship that had conquered 300 worlds, and somewhere in that knowledge, he intended to find the one thing every conqueror eventually forgot to guard against, the possibility that their prisoner was not as weak, or as harmless, as he appeared to be. Back in his cell, alone once more, Reyes lay on the narrow bed and stared up at the glowing ceiling, his mind racing through everything he had learned, and everything he still needed to know. He thought of his crew, scattered somewhere on this massive ship, and he silently promised himself that whatever happened tomorrow, whatever he saw aboard the Ashven, he would use it to bring them all home. Somewhere far behind him, in the vast dark between the stars, his distress signal was still traveling toward Earth, carrying warning of a threat far greater than anything humanity had ever faced. And somewhere ahead of him, aboard the greatest warship the Kaldrath Empire had ever built, an opportunity was waiting, hidden beneath the Empire's overwhelming confidence, for a captain clever enough and brave enough to find it. Reyes closed his eyes and tried to rest, knowing that tomorrow would demand every bit of strength and cleverness he had left. Morning did not exist aboard the Ashven, not in any way Captain James Reyes could measure. There was no sun to rise, no window in his cell to show him the passage of time. He only knew a new day had come when the wall of his cell opened once more, and a Caldrath officer stood waiting, taller and more heavily armored than the soldier who had escorted him before. "I am Commander Threxel," the officer said, its translated voice deep and clipped. "Overlord Dralik has ordered me to guide you through the Ashven. You will not touch anything without permission. You will not speak to crew members unless given permission. You will remain within arm's reach of myself or my guards at all times. Do you understand these terms?" "I understand," Reyes said. "Then come." Threxel turned and walked, not waiting to see if Reyes followed, clearly confident that a single unarmed human posed no threat worth watching closely. Two armed soldiers fell into step behind Reyes, close enough to stop him if he tried anything foolish, but the message was clear. The Caldrath did not consider him dangerous. They considered him, at most, a curiosity, a strange guest being given a tour before his fate was decided. Reyes said nothing as they walked, but his eyes missed nothing. He memorized every turn, every branching corridor, every door they passed. He noted where soldiers gathered in larger numbers and where the corridors sat empty. He noted the placement of control panels along the walls, glowing faintly with the same fire vein light that seemed to run through the entire ship like blood through veins. "The Ashven was built 400 years ago," Threxel said as they walked, his tone flat, almost bored, the voice of someone reciting facts he had repeated 1,000 times before. "It has been rebuilt and upgraded 11 times since then. It currently carries a crew of 12,000 Caldrath soldiers, along with several thousand support workers drawn from conquered species." "Conquered species work on your warship?" Reyes asked, careful to keep his tone merely curious rather than challenging. "Of course," Threxel said. "Many species prove useful for labor unsuited to Caldrath soldiers. Maintenance, cleaning, repetitive technical tasks. It would be wasteful to use trained soldiers for such work when conquered populations exist in such abundance." Reyes filed that information away carefully. Slave labor. Thousands of workers from conquered worlds, forced to serve aboard the very ship that had likely destroyed their own homes. That was not just information. That was, potentially, an opportunity, though Reyes was careful not to let his expression show what he was thinking. They passed through a wide corridor, where several of these workers moved, with heavy carts of equipment, their bodies different from both humans and Caldrath, some tall and thin with pale blue skin, others short and heavily built with rough gray hides. None of them looked up as Reyes passed. None of them made eye contact with the soldiers guarding him. Their eyes stayed fixed on the floor, their movements quick and careful, the posture of people who had learned, through hard experience, that drawing attention was dangerous. Reyes felt something tighten in his chest, a mixture of pity and cold, calculating awareness. These were not loyal servants of the Caldrath Empire, these were prisoners, just as he was, though they had clearly been prisoners for far longer, and had learned to survive by becoming invisible. They reached a massive chamber, larger than anything Reyes had yet seen aboard the ship, and Threxel stopped, gesturing with obvious pride. "The primary weapons bay." Reyes looked up, and up, and up, at rows of massive cannons built into the ship's structure, each one large enough to swallow the Meridian whole. Caldrath engineers moved along catwalks between the weapons, checking systems, running diagnostics on equipment Reyes could not begin to understand. "These weapons fired upon your ship," Threxel said. "A single blast, at only 10% power, was enough to disable your engines. At full power, a single cannon could destroy a vessel like yours completely, along with several others positioned nearby." Reyes studied the weapons carefully, noting their positioning, the way they were arranged in clusters along specific sections of the hull, the visible seams where the cannons connected to the ship's main power systems. He noted, too, a detail that Threxel did not mention, perhaps did not even think worth mentioning. The weapons were clustered heavily toward the front and sides of the ship, but far fewer were positioned toward the rear, near the massive engine section that powered the entire vessel. "Impressive," Reyes said aloud, careful to sound appropriately intimidated rather than analytical. "How many ships like the Ashven does your empire have?" "The Ashven is unique," Threxel said, a note of pride creeping into his flat tone. "It is the flagship of the entire Caldrath fleet, built to lead our largest conquests. Smaller warships, still far beyond your species' capabilities, number in the thousands across our territory." They continued through the ship, and Threxel seemed to grow more comfortable, more willing to share details, as though the sheer scale of what he was showing had convinced him that no amount of information could possibly help a prisoner from such a primitive species. Reyes used that overconfidence carefully, asking questions that seemed innocent, even foolish, while carefully building a picture in his mind of the HFY's true strengths and true weaknesses. They passed through the engine section, where massive reactors pulsed with contained energy, and Reyes noted the heavy shielding, the careful redundancy built into every system, but also noted how narrow the maintenance corridors were compared to the wide halls elsewhere on the ship, as though the engineers who designed the HFY had prioritized power above easy access and repair. They passed through a section housing smaller fighter craft, sleek attack ships that could launch from the HFY to swarm enemy vessels, and Reyes noted the launch bay doors, the pattern of their operation, the brief window of vulnerability that existed each time a new wave of fighters launched. Throughout the tour, Reyes maintained a careful balance, asking enough questions to gather real information, but never so many that Threxall or his guards grew suspicious. He played the role of an amazed, overwhelmed prisoner, letting his voice carry genuine notes of fear and awe, because in truth, much of what he saw did genuinely frighten him. The HFY was a masterpiece of destructive engineering, built by a species with centuries of conquest experience. Humanity, with its 200 years of clumsy, stumbling space exploration, was not remotely prepared to face something like this in open battle. But Reyes had learned, over many years of naval command, that even the most powerful ship, even the most experienced crew, could be beaten if you understood exactly where to strike. No warship was without weakness. No empire was without a crack somewhere in its armor. His job now was to find that crack and remember it, and carry it home if he possibly could. As they walked through a long corridor connecting two major sections of the ship, Reyes noticed one of the alien workers, a tall, thin being with pale blue skin, glance up at him briefly, before quickly looking away again. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but something about the look caught Reyes's attention. It was not fear, not exactly. It was something closer to curiosity, the same kind of curiosity Reyes himself felt studying this ship. He filed the observation away, uncertain what, if anything, it might mean, but unwilling to dismiss it entirely. "Commander Threxall," Reyes said carefully, as they approached what appeared to be a large command center, filled with glowing screens and rows of Kaldrath officers monitoring the ship's systems. "May I ask what happens to prisoners like myself, once Overlord Dralik decides our fate?" Threxall glanced at him, something almost like amusement in his alien eyes. "That depends entirely on what Overlord Dralik decides. Some captains are executed, as examples to their species. Some are kept as advisors, useful for understanding species we intend to conquer more fully. Some are simply released, sent home to spread word of the Empire's power, ensuring their species surrenders quickly, rather than wasting our resources in a drawn-out conquest." "And which do you think I'll be?" Reyes asked. Threxall studied him for a long moment. "I do not know, Captain Reyes. In all my years of service, I have never seen Overlord Dralik show this much interest in a prisoner from such a young, weak species. You are unusual. Whether that will save you or doom you, I cannot say." They reached the command center, and Threxall gestured for Reyes to observe from a raised platform near the entrance. Below them, dozens of Kaldrath officers monitored screens filled with data, star charts, and what Reyes assumed were reports from various parts of the vast empire. At the center of the room stood a large display, showing a map of the surrounding sector of space, with the HFY marked at its center, and smaller markers indicating other ships, other fleets, spread across a territory so vast it made Reyes's chest tighten with quiet dread. "This is where the HFY's true power lies," Threxall said. "Not simply in its weapons, but in its ability to command. From this room, Overlord Dralik coordinates fleets across dozens of star systems. Every conquest, every campaign, begins here." Reyes studied the display carefully, noting the positions of nearby fleets, the distances between them, the apparent gaps in coverage in certain regions of space. He could not read the alien text labeling each marker, but he could understand the shapes, the patterns, the general layout of Kaldrath military strength in this sector. And then, almost as an afterthought, one of the officers near the display spoke, and Threxall turned to answer a question, his attention drawn away from Reyes for just a moment. In that brief window, Reyes's eyes caught something he almost missed, a section of the display map, far toward the edge of Caldrath territory, where the markers indicating ships and fleets were sparse, almost non-existent, a gap in the Empire's otherwise overwhelming coverage. It was the direction, Reyes realized with a jolt of understanding, that led back toward Earth. He kept his face carefully neutral, giving no sign of what he had noticed, as Threxall turned back to him. "We should continue," Threxall said. "There is more of the ship to see, if you wish to fully understand what you are facing." "Yes," Reyes said quietly, his mind racing, even as he kept his voice calm. "I would like to see everything." As they left the command center, walking once more through the glowing corridors of the Ashven, Reyes felt the pieces of a plan beginning to form in his mind, fragile and uncertain, but growing stronger with every new detail he gathered. The Caldrath Empire was vast, powerful, and utterly confident in its own strength, but even the largest empire had gaps, weaknesses, cracks, that a clever enough mind might find and use. He thought of the alien worker who had glanced at him with curiosity rather than fear. He thought of the gap in fleet coverage leading back toward Earth. He thought of the weapons clustered toward the front of the ship, leaving the rear more vulnerable than Threxall seemed to realize. Each piece, alone, meant little. But together, slowly, carefully, they were beginning to form something Reyes had not truly believed possible when he first stood in Overlord Dralik's chamber, facing a fate he could not control. They were beginning to form a chance. The tour continued for hours more, through cargo holds and living quarters, through training facilities where young Caldrath soldiers practiced combat drills, through a museum-like chamber displaying trophies and records from 300 conquered worlds, relics of species who had not survived their encounter with the Empire. Reyes studied it all, memorizing what he could, understanding that he might never have this opportunity again, and that everything he learned now might be the only chance his own species had to avoid becoming the next display in that grim museum of conquest. By the time Threxall finally led him back toward his cell, exhaustion had settled deep into Reyes's bones, both physical and mental, the strain of hours spent gathering information while maintaining the careful mask of a harmless, awestruck prisoner. But beneath that exhaustion, something else had taken root, something Reyes had not expected to feel again since the moment his ship had first been captured. It was determination, sharp and clear, the quiet certainty of a captain who had found, however small, however fragile, a path forward. As the wall of his cell sealed shut behind him once more, Reyes sat on the narrow bed and closed his eyes, running through everything he had learned, organizing it, building it into something he could use. Somewhere on this ship, his crew was waiting. Somewhere far behind him, Earth was waiting too, unaware of exactly what was coming, unaware of exactly how outmatched they truly were, and unaware, too, of the information their captain was gathering, piece by careful piece, in the belly of the enemy's greatest warship. Tomorrow Reyes did not know what would come, but tonight, for the first time since his capture, he allowed himself to believe that his species might yet have a chance, if only he could find a way to use what he had learned before Overlord Dralik decided his fate for good. 3 days passed before Captain James Reyes was summoned again. 3 days of silence and waiting inside the glowing walls of his cell. 3 days spent turning over every detail he had gathered aboard the Ashven, searching for a plan that could actually work. He had almost none of the pieces he needed. He had no weapon, no allies he could truly trust, no way to contact his scattered crew, and no way to reach Earth to warn them of what he had learned. All he had was information, carefully gathered and carefully hidden inside his own memory, and a growing sense that time was running out. When the wall of his cell finally opened again, it was not Threxall who stood waiting, but a single soldier, smaller and quieter than the others he had encountered. The soldier did not speak at first, simply gesturing for Reyes to follow, and something about its posture, hesitant, almost nervous, struck Reyes as different from every other Caldrath he had met so far. They walked through corridors Reyes did not recognize, away from the main paths he had traveled during his tour, deeper into a section of the ship that felt older, quieter, less traveled. Reyes's instincts, honed through years of command, told him something unusual was happening, though he could not yet guess what. The soldier led him into a small, dim storage room, and once the door sealed shut behind them, it removed its helmet, revealing a face closer to the pale blue-skinned workers Reyes had seen during his tour, rather than the gray-green Kaldrath soldiers who had captured him. It was not a Kaldrath at all. It was a member of a conquered species, disguised in Kaldrath armor. "You are surprised," the being said, its voice, without the deep grinding quality of true Kaldrath speech, carrying a softer, more musical tone, even through the translation device. "Good. That means our disguise is working." "Who are you?" Reyes asked carefully, his mind racing to understand what was happening. "My name is Vesic," the being said. "I am Doran. My people were conquered by the Kaldrath Empire nearly 200 years ago. Most of us serve as laborers now, scattered across 100 Kaldrath ships and worlds. But some of us have found other ways to be useful." "You're part of a resistance," Reyes said, understanding dawning. "We prefer to think of ourselves as patient," Vesic said. "The Kaldrath Empire is vast and powerful, far too powerful for open rebellion to succeed. But even the strongest empire has cracks, weaknesses, moments of vulnerability. For 200 years, my people, and others like us, have been watching, waiting, gathering information, hoping for a chance to strike a real blow against the empire, or at least to weaken it enough that other species might have a chance to resist." Reyes felt his heart pounding. This was not the opportunity he had expected, but it was, perhaps, exactly what he needed. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Overlord Dralik's interest in you has created a stir among the crew," Vesic said. "Word has spread that a human captain asked to see the Ashven, and that Dralik agreed, something unheard of in living memory. Some see it as a sign of weakness in Dralik himself, growing too curious, too soft, after centuries of easy conquest. Others see it as an opportunity. I am here because my people believe you might be one of those opportunities, Captain Reyes." "What do you want from me?" Reyes asked. "Information," Vesic said. "You toured the Ashven. You saw its weapons, its command center, its weaknesses, things even we have not been able to fully map after years of quiet observation. In exchange, we can offer you something you desperately need, a way to get a message to your ship, and perhaps, eventually, a way to escape." Reyes considered this carefully. Trusting Vesic was a risk, but refusing to trust anyone was its own kind of risk, one that guaranteed he would remain trapped and powerless. "What do you know about the gap in Kaldrath fleet coverage, toward the edge of this sector? I saw it on a display in the command center, during my tour." Vesic's expression shifted, something sharpening in its alien features. "You noticed that? Interesting. That gap exists because the Kaldrath Empire has been slowly withdrawing forces from that region over the past several months, redirecting them toward a larger campaign, deeper in the core territories. It is a temporary weakness, but a real one. If a fleet were to strike through that gap while it remains open, it could reach deep into Kaldrath territory, before facing serious resistance. That's the direction back toward Earth," Reyes said quietly. "Yes," Vesic said. "Which means, Captain Reyes, that your homeworld sits closer to a genuine opportunity than you might realize. If your people could organize a fleet, even a small one, and strike through that gap while it remains open, they could do real damage to Kaldrath supply lines and communication networks in this sector. It would not defeat the Empire. Nothing could do that, but it could buy your species time, and it could prove to the Empire that conquering Earth would cost far more than Overlord Dralik currently believes." Reyes's mind raced, connecting pieces of information he had gathered during his tour with what Vesic was now telling him. The weapons clustered toward the front of the Ashven, leaving the rear more vulnerable. The narrow maintenance corridors near the engine section, the brief window of vulnerability during fighter launches, and now, a genuine gap in Kaldrath fleet coverage leading directly back toward human space. "I need to get a message to my crew," Reyes said, "and somehow, to Earth. Can you help with that?" "Your crew, yes," Vesic said. "Several of your people are being held in a section of the ship close to where my people work. It will not be easy, but it is possible. Reaching Earth directly is more difficult. The Ashven's communication systems are heavily guarded, and any transmission would be detected immediately. There has to be a way," Reyes said, refusing to accept defeat so easily. "What about the distress signal my ship already sent? Earth already knows something happened out here. If I could just confirm what we're facing, if I could get even a fragment of information back to them." Vesic was quiet for a long moment, considering. There may be a way. My people maintain a small, hidden transmitter, built in secret over many years, hidden within the ship's structure where Kaldrath sensors cannot easily detect it. It is weak and slow, capable of sending only short bursts of encoded data, but it has worked before, allowing us to pass information between resistance cells scattered across different Kaldrath vessels. If we could encode a message using it, aimed toward the last known trajectory of your distress signal, there is a chance, a real chance, that it could reach a relay point still within range of Earth's outer sensors. Do it, Reyes said immediately. Whatever it takes, however small the chance, we have to try. Vesic studied him for a moment longer, and something in the alien's expression softened, a recognition, perhaps, of a fellow prisoner, willing to fight for those he was responsible for. Very well, Captain Reyes. But this will take time to arrange safely. In the meantime, you must continue playing your role convincingly. Overlord Dralik's curiosity has given you an unusual freedom within this ship, but that freedom will vanish instantly if he suspects you are using it for anything other than idle curiosity. Over the following days, Reyes found himself summoned again and again to speak with Overlord Dralik, each conversation a careful dance of information, curiosity, and calculated humility. Dralik seemed to genuinely enjoy these exchanges, questioning Reyes about human history, human philosophy, human strategies for survival and growth. Reyes answered honestly where he could, understanding that the more genuinely interesting he seemed to the Overlord, the more time he bought for Vesic's resistance network to arrange what needed to be arranged. During these days, Reyes learned that Dralik was not simply a mindless conqueror, but a being who had grown, in some strange way, tired of easy victories. 300 conquests, achieved through overwhelming force against species too weak or too disorganized to offer real resistance, had left the Overlord with a strange hunger, an unspoken desire for something more challenging, something that might make his 400 years of life feel less like a long, predictable march toward inevitable victory. You do not fully understand what you have shown me, Overlord Dralik, Reyes said carefully, during one such conversation. You've shown me your warship, your weapons, your empire's power. But more than that, you've shown me what your empire fears. Dralik's eyes narrowed. The Kaldrath Empire fears nothing, Captain Reyes. Then why has your empire conquered 312 worlds, but never once encountered a species it considered worth truly respecting, worth treating as something other than prey? Reyes pressed carefully. Perhaps it isn't that those species didn't exist. Perhaps it's that your empire has grown so used to easy victories, it no longer knows how to recognize a real challenge when it finally appears. For a long moment, Dralik said nothing, his amber eyes studying Reyes with an intensity that made the human skin crawl. Then, slowly, the Overlord smiled, an expression that looked strange and unsettling on his reptilian features. You believe your species could be that challenge, Captain Reyes? I believe, Reyes said carefully, that you won't know until you actually test us properly, rather than simply erasing us before we've had a chance to show you what we're capable of. It was a dangerous thing to say, a direct challenge wrapped in careful words, but Reyes had come to understand something important about Overlord Dralik over these past days. The ancient conqueror was, in his own way, bored, and boredom, in a being who had lived 400 years and conquered 300 worlds, was perhaps more dangerous and more useful than any weapon Reyes could have hoped to find. That night, back in his cell, Vesic returned, slipping through the door with the same quiet caution as before. The message has been sent, the resistance fighter said without preamble. We do not know if it reached Earth. The transmitter is weak, and much can interfere with a signal traveling such a distance. But it is done, Captain Reyes. Whatever happens now is beyond our control. Thank you, Reyes said, feeling a weight lift slightly from his chest, even as new uncertainty took its place. What about my crew? 3 of your people have been moved to a section of the ship my people have some access to, Vesic said. I cannot promise more than that yet, but it is progress. Overlord Dralik has not decided your fate, Captain Reyes, and every day that decision remains delayed is another day we have to prepare. Prepare for what exactly? Reyes asked. Vesic's expression grew serious. For the possibility that your Earth fleet, if it received your message and decided to act, might attempt to strike through the gap in Kaldrath coverage we discussed. If that happens, Captain Reyes, this ship, and every soul aboard it, human, Kaldrath and Doran alike, will be caught in the middle of whatever follows. Reyes absorbed this, understanding fully for the first time the true scale of what he might have set in motion. He had come aboard the Ashven seeking information, seeking any small advantage he could carry home to protect his species. He had not fully considered, until this moment, that the information he gathered, and the message he had just sent, might result in a battle fought here, aboard this very ship, with his own crew, and the fragile Doran resistance network caught directly in the crossfire. If Earth comes, Reyes said slowly, we need to be ready to help them, not just hide and hope for the best. Agreed, Vesic said. Which means, Captain Reyes, that in the coming days, you and I have a great deal of careful planning ahead of us, and very little time in which to do it. As Vesic slipped back out into the corridor, disappearing once more into the guise of an ordinary Kaldrath soldier, Reyes sat alone in his cell, staring at the glowing walls that had become, over these past days, a strange kind of second home. Somewhere out in the vast darkness of space, a message was traveling, weak and uncertain, toward Earth, carrying warning of an empire far more powerful than humanity had ever imagined, and perhaps, if it arrived in time, carrying hope as well. Reyes closed his eyes and thought of his crew, scattered across the Ashven, some now within reach thanks to Vesic's careful work. He thought of Earth, distant and unaware, perhaps already receiving his warning, perhaps already beginning to decide how to respond. And he thought of Overlord Dralik, ancient and powerful, but restless, in a way that might, if Reyes played his cards correctly, become the crack in the Empire's armor that humanity desperately needed. Whatever came next, Reyes understood that the quiet, careful phase of his captivity was ending. Something was coming, something large and dangerous, and when it arrived, he intended to be ready for it, not as a helpless prisoner, but as a captain still fighting, in whatever small ways remained available to him, for the survival of everyone counting on him to bring them home. 7 days after Vesic sent the hidden transmission, the alarms aboard the Ashven began to scream. Captain James Reyes woke instantly, years of naval training pulling him from sleep the moment the sound reached his ears. The glowing walls of his cell pulsed red instead of their usual soft fire vein pattern, and somewhere beyond the sealed door, he could hear the sound of running feet, shouted orders in the harsh Kaldrath language, the distant hum of the ship's systems shifting into a higher, more urgent state. He stood, heart pounding, uncertain whether this was the moment he had been both hoping for and dreading, or something else entirely. He did not have to wait long for an answer. The wall of his cell tore open, not with the smooth, controlled motion of before, but violently, sparks flying from the edges. Vesic stood there, no longer wearing the disguise of Kaldrath armor, dressed instead in simple gray clothing, a small device clutched in one hand. It's happening, Vesic said, breathless. A fleet has entered the sector through the gap we discussed. Kaldrath sensors identified them only minutes ago. Captain Reyes, it's your Earth. Relief and terror crashed through Reyes at the same moment. How many ships? Not many, Vesic said. Perhaps 20, compared to the dozens of Kaldrath vessels stationed throughout this sector. By every measure of raw strength, your fleet should be hopelessly outmatched. And yet they are advancing directly toward the Ashven's last known position, moving with a confidence that has thrown the entire command deck into confusion. Reyes felt a fierce, sudden pride swell in his chest. Earth had received his message. Earth had understood, and Earth had come, not with overwhelming force, because overwhelming force was not something humanity possessed against an empire like the Kaldrath, but with courage, and, Reyes suspected, with a plan built on exactly the kind of information he had risked everything to gather. We need to move, Reyes said. My crew? Already being gathered, Vesic said. My people are creating diversions throughout the ship, drawing Kaldrath attention away from the detention areas. We do not have much time before Overlord Dralik realizes the full scope of what is happening. They moved quickly through the ship, Vesic leading Reyes through corridors that grew increasingly chaotic, as Kaldrath soldiers rushed toward battle stations, shouting orders, moving with an urgency Reyes had not witnessed during his earlier tour. The confidence that had permeated every conversation with Threxel and Dralik seemed to have cracked, just slightly, replaced by the controlled panic of a crew unused to facing an enemy that refused to simply surrender. They found Lieutenant Okafor and Ensign Ruiz in a holding area, guarded by only 2 soldiers, both of whom Vesik's resistance fighters had already subdued, using stolen weapons and the element of surprise. Okafor's face broke into an expression of fierce relief at the sight of Reyes. "Captain, we thought," she started. "No time," Reyes said, though he gripped her shoulder briefly, a small gesture of reassurance. "Where's the rest of the crew?" "Scattered across 3 other sections," Ruiz said. "Vesik's people are working to reach them, but it's chaos out there." "Then we help however we can," Reyes said, turning to Vesik. "What's the plan? You said your people had been mapping the Ashven's weaknesses for years. Now's the time to use everything we know." Vesik nodded grimly. "There is a secondary control node near the ship's rear section, close to the engine area you toured. It regulates power distribution to the weapons bay. If we can disable it, even temporarily, the Ashven's primary cannons will lose significant power, buying your fleet crucial time to close the distance without being destroyed outright." "The rear weapons gap," Reyes said, remembering the detail he had noted during his tour. The clusters of cannons concentrated toward the front and sides of the ship, leaving the rear comparatively undefended. "That's exactly where we need to strike." They moved quickly, Vesik leading them through increasingly narrow maintenance corridors, the same tight passages Reyes had noted during his original tour, corridors built for efficiency rather than easy defense. Along the way, they gathered more of the Meridian's crew, pulled from holding areas by Doran resistance fighters working in careful coordination, until nearly 24 humans moved together through the chaos of the alien warship, armed with whatever weapons they had managed to seize. They reached the control node just as the ship shuddered violently, the first exchange of weapons fire between the Kaldrath fleet and the arriving human ships rattling through the Ashven's massive structure. Reyes stumbled but caught himself, watching as Vesik worked quickly at the control panel, fingers moving across glowing symbols with practiced speed. "This will take several minutes," Vesik said. "The security protocols here are stronger than in most sections of the ship." "Then we hold this position," Reyes said, turning to his crew. "Ruiz, Okafor, position everyone to cover both corridor entrances. If Kaldrath soldiers come to investigate, we can't let them reach this panel before Vesik finishes." His crew moved into position with the discipline of people who had trained for exactly this kind of crisis, even if none of them had ever expected to face it aboard an alien warship, fighting alongside strange blue-skinned allies against reptilian conquerors who had ruled this sector of space for 1,000 years. The wait felt endless. Reyes could hear the distant sounds of battle growing louder, the Ashven shuddering under what he guessed were direct hits from the human fleet, small strikes compared to the ship's massive scale, but strikes that would not have been possible without the information Reyes had gathered, the weaknesses he had noted, the intelligence that had somehow, against all odds, made its way back to Earth in time to matter. A group of Kaldrath soldiers rounded the corridor's far entrance, weapons raised, clearly investigating the disturbance their sensors had detected. Reyes's crew opened fire immediately, and for several tense, chaotic minutes, the narrow corridor became a battlefield, human weapons, crude by Kaldrath standards but effective at close range, exchanging fire with alien soldiers who had never expected resistance from prisoners they considered barely worth notice. "Got it." Vesik shouted over the chaos as the control panel flared bright, then dimmed. "The weapons bay power distribution is disabled. It won't hold for long, but it should be enough." As if in answer, the entire ship shuddered violently, a series of impacts rattling through the Ashven structure in rapid succession. Reyes understood immediately what was happening. The human fleet, no longer facing the Ashven's full weapons power, was pressing their advantage, striking hard and fast, before the Kaldrath crew could restore full defenses. "We need to get to an escape pod," Reyes said, pulling his attention back to the immediate crisis of the corridor firefight. "Vesik, is there a way off this ship for all of us, humans and Doran both?" "There is a launch bay 2 levels below us," Vesik said, "used for smaller support craft. If we can reach it before the Ashven's crew regains full control, we may be able to escape into the chaos of the battle and reach your fleet." They fought their way through the ship, corridor by corridor, gathering more of the scattered Meridian crew as Doran resistance fighters guided them through paths avoiding the heaviest concentrations of Kaldrath soldiers. The ship shuddered continuously now, the sounds of battle a constant backdrop to their desperate flight, and Reyes felt a fierce, disbelieving hope building in his chest with every level they descended. They were almost at the launch bay when Overlord Dralik found them. He stood in the corridor ahead, flanked by a dozen soldiers, his golden and red armor gleaming even in the dim battle alarm lighting, his amber eyes fixed on Reyes with an intensity that stopped the human captain in his tracks. "You," Dralik said, his voice carrying a mixture of fury and something that might have been reluctant admiration. "You asked to see my warship out of curiosity, Captain Reyes, and now your fleet strikes at its very heart, using knowledge you could only have gained from that tour." "I told you," Reyes said, standing his ground, despite every soldier's weapon aimed directly at him and his crew. "My species disagrees with itself constantly, but when we finally agree on something, we tend to be very hard to stop." Dralik's eyes narrowed, and for a long moment, Reyes genuinely believed this was the end, that Dralik would simply order his soldiers to open fire and end this small, stubborn act of human defiance before it could accomplish anything more. But instead, something shifted in the ancient conqueror's expression. A recognition, perhaps, of exactly the kind of challenge he had unknowingly invited aboard his own ship. 312 conquests, Dralik said slowly, and never once has a prisoner turned my own curiosity into a weapon against me. He studied Reyes for a long moment, the sounds of battle still raging throughout the ship around them. "Your fleet cannot defeat the Kaldrath Empire, Captain Reyes. This battle, whatever its outcome, changes nothing about that fundamental truth." "Maybe not today," Reyes said, "but you'll remember us now. You'll remember that Earth wasn't an easy conquest, wasn't another name added quietly to your empire's long list of erased species. That matters, Overlord Dralik, even if you don't believe it yet." For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, Dralik raised one hand, and his soldiers lowered their weapons. "Let them go," Dralik said. "Overlord," one of the soldiers began, clearly shocked. "I said let them go," Dralik repeated, his voice carrying absolute authority. "This conquest has become complicated. I will not waste further resources chasing a single escaped prisoner and his crew through the chaos of an active battle, not when there are more pressing matters requiring my attention." He turned his full attention back to Reyes one final time. "But hear me clearly, Captain Reyes. This is not over. The Kaldrath Empire does not forget defiance, even small defiance such as this. We will meet again, and when we do, I will not be so generous with my curiosity." "I'm counting on it," Reyes said, and for just a moment, something that might almost have been respect passed between the two very different captains, human and Kaldrath alike, before Dralik turned and strode away, his soldiers following, leaving the corridor to Earth's escaping prisoners. They reached the launch bay minutes later, commandeering two small Kaldrath support craft under the chaotic cover of ongoing battle. Reyes watched as his crew, along with several Doran resistance fighters who chose to flee alongside them rather than remain enslaved aboard the Ashvin, boarded the small ships with careful urgency. "Vesic," Reyes said, as the resistance fighter prepared to board alongside them. "Thank you, for everything. Earth owes your people a debt we may never be able to fully repay." "Perhaps," Vesic said, "your species' resistance today will inspire others across the Empire to remember that the Kaldrath are not truly invincible, merely powerful. That alone may be worth more than any debt repaid." The small ships launched into the chaos of battle, weaving between the massive shapes of Kaldrath warships and the smaller, scrappier vessels of Earth's fleet, until finally, against odds that had seemed impossible only days before, they reached the safety of a human cruiser, the ISV Resolute, sent as part of the small but determined fleet Earth had assembled in response to Reyes's desperate message. As Reyes stood on the Resolute's bridge, watching the Ashvan retreat into the distance, damaged but far from destroyed, escorted by the remaining Kaldrath fleet as the human ships broke off their attack to avoid overextending themselves against an enemy still vastly more powerful in raw numbers, he felt the full weight of everything that had happened finally settle over him. They had not won. Not truly. The Kaldrath Empire remained a threat of staggering scale, a power that could still, someday, return with overwhelming force to finish what this battle had left unresolved. But they had also proven something, both to the Empire and to themselves, that would echo far beyond this single encounter. Humanity would not simply surrender, would not simply become another quiet name erased from the galaxy's memory. "Message from Earth Command, Captain," said the Resolute's communications officer. "They want a full report on everything you learned aboard that warship, as soon as possible." Reyes nodded, watching the stars outside the bridge window, the same cold, silent stars that had watched over his capture just weeks before, now watching over humanity's first true stand against an empire that had conquered 300 worlds without ever facing real resistance. "Tell them I'll have it ready," Reyes said quietly. "Tell them everything starts now." Behind him, his crew worked at their stations, exhausted but alive, human and Doran alike, survivors of an encounter that had tested everything they believed about courage, curiosity, and the strange, unpredictable ways that even the smallest act of defiance could change the course of history. And somewhere out in the vast darkness between the stars, Overlord Dralik's flagship continued its slow retreat, carrying with it the memory of a captain who had once asked, simply, to see their warship, never imagining how completely that single request would change everything that followed. The galaxy was vast, and the Kaldrath Empire remained powerful beyond anything humanity had yet built. But for the first time since the Meridian's capture, Captain James Reyes allowed himself to believe that Earth's story in the stars was only just beginning, and that whatever challenges lay ahead, humanity would face them the same way it always had, stubborn, curious, and utterly unwilling to simply lie down and disappear.